Is an Israeli affairs analyst, and he joins me now live from Sydney. Anthony, great to have you here with us on TRT World. Now, Muslims have made it very clear that Al-Aqsa is a red line, not just for the Palestinians, but for the whole Muslim world. Then why do we see Israeli forces storm this holy site time and time again?
The short answer in one word is impunity. Israel, on many occasions, including with Al-Aqsa for years, as your report rightly said, can pretty much get away with this because much of the international community, and what I mean by that is the US, much of the Arab world, frankly, won't do much beyond words. Yes, a few years ago there was a war between Israel and Hamas, and I note in the last hour or so there's been some missiles fired from Lebanon into Israel, which is a concerning development. But in general, this is kind of an annual, almost like kabuki theatre. The difference this time, though, or certainly in the last few months, is there's a new far-right Israeli government. And some of those key members of Netanyahu's cabinet, they want escalation. They actually want the idea, their ultimate vision, to be honest, and they say this themselves, they want to destroy Al-Aqsa. Their vision is to destroy Al-Aqsa completely, burn it to the ground, and build a third Jewish temple on its ashes. That might sound extreme to viewers, but that actually is the vision of key people in the Israeli government today. This is not on the fringes anymore. This is in the Israeli mainstream, which is deeply disturbing.
And what would you like to say about the timings of these raids? See, these raids are not only happening at Islam's third holiest site, but they're happening during Islam's holiest month of Ramadan.
And also, of course, Passover, which, as you said in your report, yes, the Jewish holiday, which begins shortly. Look, I think, again, this has been happening pretty much every year. And for the number of last months, since Netanyahu's government came back into power in December, there's been a lot of talk in the Israeli media about what might happen during Ramadan and escalation of tensions. I think it's important for people to realize this is a deliberate provocation by Israel. They want escalation. They want some kind of increased violence because in their mind, they have complete impunity, A. And B, I think there's a sense somehow that they want to show, they being Israel, the Israeli police, the Israeli soldiers, who's in charge. Yes, there is an internationally recognized sort of plan of sorts to keep a so-called peace at Al-Aqsa. But in the last few years, that's kind of breaking down, to be honest. And the countries that are trying to enforce that, such as Jordan and others, are fairly powerless to do much about that. And I think until there is some kind of accountability for Israeli actions here, these pictures that one sees in the last days in Al-Aqsa are so outrageous and shocking. And I say that as someone who's Jewish, and I've spent time there myself. It is absolutely outrageous that Israel can get away with this. But again, it's complete culture of impunity. And until that changes, this will keep on happening year after year after year.
Right, and before I ask my next question, happy Passover, Anthony.
Thank you.
See, certainly we have seen outrage coming from the international community, not just this time, but when it happened in the past as well. The international community raises its voice. The Muslim world unites against condemning Israeli government's actions in Al-Aqsa Mosque. But has anything really happened when it comes to ending these raids? So what I would like to ask you now is, do you think it's about time the Israeli civilians do something to put some sort of pressure on what you say is the far-right government in power? Because, see, we have seen when the Israeli President Netanyahu tried to make controversial changes to the judicial system, the Israelis took to the streets, and guess what happened? Netanyahu was forced to suspend the law. So do you think it's about something like that should happen now?
My answer to that is twofold. The short answer is yes. And of course, it's interesting that in the last few months, as you say, there's been a huge number of Israeli protests, the biggest in its history. But the vast bulk of those protesters, those Israeli Jewish protesters, aren't that interested in this issue. In fact, not interested in Palestinians. They're interested in maintaining what they view as so-called Jewish democracy. And it's clear in the last few months, with some notable exceptions, there's been barely any Palestinian protesters, and the issues of Palestinian rights, the rights of Al-Aqsa, are virtually ignored. So I'm not going to say every Israeli Jew supports Netanyahu. They don't. Many oppose him. But when they're protesting in the streets in the last few months, again, they're principally wanting almost a return to the so-called status quo. And secondly, you're right, the Arab world comes out in outrage. But again, in the last 5 or 10 years, you've seen a huge growth in connections between Israel and the Muslim world, UAE, Bahrain and others. So yes, they put out statements, but the truth is, in reality, what they want in some ways is some kind of security relations with Israel. They want Israeli technology, they want its weapons, they want its spyware. That's increasingly how Israel is viewed, not just in the Muslim world, but in the world itself. And therefore, most of the Arab countries that, yes, put out stern statements in the last few days, actually behind the scenes are very, very close to the Israeli government, regardless of who's in the prime minister's seat.
And Anthony, before I let you go, just one quick question. You know it better than I do. These raids are basically motivated by theology. They're not politically motivated at all.
I think what they are is a deeply disturbing, quasi-messianic, far-right Israeli Jewish settler movement, which for decades was on the fringes of Israeli society, although obviously there are now 750,000 settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. But now this movement is in the center of the Israeli government. It's in the Israeli cabinet, not Netanyahu, but people around him, Ben-gvir, Smotrich and others. Their vision, as I said, which they've openly called for years, is the destruction of Al-Aqsa. That's what they want. And they want escalation. They believe in an increased violence, almost like a kind of end of the world type kind of battle between Judaism and Islam, which is horrific thought. And until the international community not just wakes up to that, but actually holds Israel to account, these escalations, I fear, are only going to keep getting worse in the coming years.
Well, certainly the situation right now is very concerning. Antony Loewenstein, fascinating insight into the topic. Thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.